Okay, we're going to get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Michael. My pronouns are he, they. I am the founder of We Create Space. And for those who are joining us for the first time, we are a global collective of LGBTQ plus change makers. And we're united really on a mission to improve the lives of queer people around the world. And we do that through empowering our communities and our allies with tools, with knowledge, and fundamentally with a support network as well for self-care, for personal growth and queer leadership. We're a non-profit social enterprise, and we work across multiple industries, cultures, societies. This series is called Queer Perspectives. It's a webinar series focused on empowering communities through conversation. And today's live panel discussion will be with 4 queer leaders on the topic of growing older and leaving a legacy, quite apt given that we're approaching the end of LGBTQ plus History Month. And each of our wonderful speakers are going to be sharing their stories, their perspectives, their unique lived experiences through the lens of their different intersecting identities. And we hope that you're not just going to gain some insight and some new perspective, but you're also going to get some practical advice around creating change within your own organizations or your own communities. So on that note, I want to pass over to our wonderful host, Sonny Thaker, who is going to be facilitating today's session. Thanks, Sonny.
Thank you, Michael, and welcome everyone. Yeah, just a brief introduction to myself. I'm Sonny. I am a certified coach. I am also a facilitator and coach with We Create Space, and I've done several workshops. And yeah, professionally, I do that, as well as I'm doing a master's in applied psychology for fashion. And I'm really interested in the intersection of psychology, fashion, and who we create ourselves in digital spaces. So as we go into the metaverse, who and what we're creating ourselves as. But enough about me. We have 3 incredible people here today to share their perspectives. And I'm now going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves. So I will pass over first to Erica. And you're on mute, Erica.
There had to be one, didn't there? Thank you, Sonny. Hi, everybody. My name's Erica Rose. My pronouns are she, her. I identify as a gay woman, and I live in West Sussex in the UK, on the south coast. I'm the International QEHS Director at the Body Shop International, and I'm co-chair of our LGBTQ plus employee network, which is called TBS Together. For a visual description, I'm sitting in a brightly coloured room in a brightly coloured shirt, lots of jade colour on the back wall, lots of teal, and some books and some pictures. And I've got white blonde hair, and I'm a medium build white woman. Thank you, Sonny.
Thank you, Erica. And if I can pass on to Jeff.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. It's going to be a very interesting one, I think. So I'm Jeff Parsons. I am, my pronouns are he, him. I am a managing director currently at Macquarie, where I'm also co-chair of the LGBTQ plus network, and outside work I'm also a trustee or board member of a couple of UK LGBTQ plus charities, Give Out and Diversity Role Models, and a new venture called Pride in Tennis. I am currently sitting in front of a Zoom background, which is not very interesting for people. It's a black background with a rainbow-coloured ribbon sprawling across it, advertising my organization's pride in its achievement in just becoming the #1 ranked organization on the Stonewall Workplace Equality Index earlier this week. Very much looking forward to the discussion. Oh, and by the way, I'm in London.
Thank you, Jeff. And I'll rebut you. Your background is actually quite very interesting, I think. I think it's really dynamic. And I will now pass on to Eva.
Hi everyone, my name is Eva Echo. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an activist, writer and public speaker. I'm head of communications and engagement at Birmingham Pride, and I also sit on the Crown Prosecution Service's hate crime panel. I am a woman of East Asian descent, black hair, tattoos on my neck, and in the background is my logo, which is a panda on a rocking horse holding a drumstick against the Pride flag. I'm currently in Birmingham.
Thank you. And a visual description of myself, which I omitted, my apologies. I am a brown male. I identify with he, him. I have no hair. I'm wearing gold glasses. I have a plant, a large plant to the rear of me and a white wall. And I'm wearing all navy blue, which actually shows up as black on the screen. And so for everyone who's joined us, first of all, thank you. Today's discussion is going to be bite-sized answers because we could really go into these questions, but I'm going to ask and challenge my speakers to really get to the crux of what I'm asking and give me bite-sized 2 to 3 minute answers. And that way we can get sort of the concentrated feeling of our collected energy here, or collective energy here. So let's just jump right in, and I'm going to continue in the order that I began, and this question will go to each of you. So Erica, you might not have time to prepare, and the question is, what does legacy mean to you?
Immediately when I think about legacy, I'm thinking about the learning I've had about myself, and what I've imparted to others within my life, what I've shared, how people were, and what people remember from me. It's for me, it's the impact I've had on people. It's the impact I've had on people, or an organization, or a team, or a group of people. And for me, that's the key part of what I think legacy means to me.
Thank you very much. And for the speakers, please feel free to bring in what you've just, what you want to bring in, as well as perhaps what you've just heard, so you can build on the discussion. And Jeff, if I ask, what does legacy mean to you? Where do you take us?
I would very much build on what Erica just said, actually. I mean, for me, legacy means leaving the environment that you're in better off than it was when you entered it. And it's very timely for me, this question, actually, because I'm literally 4 days away from leaving my current job, which will be my last job within financial services, and effectively retiring from financial services. And I look back at the time that I've had during the last 9 years here at Macquarie, and before that in various other banks, and look back at the impact that I've had, and have attempted to have. And it's very much a question of saying, well, how different is it? It's very different. I mean, when I joined Macquarie, not that it was a place where it was at all challenging to be LGBTQ+ or any other protected characteristic, but it was very not even discussed. It was very much just implicit, get on with it if you want, or don't try and deal with the issue. It was all just something which was not discussed. That isn't the case now. As you can tell from my background, we're very overtly LGBTQ+ inclusive, and I'm very pleased to have been able to be a major architect in achieving that, and using it as a beacon really to try and promote further change within industries which we deal with.
Well, yeah, it's really interesting. Both of your answers lend back to more of service in terms of legacy, as opposed to what did I do. It's about what have I left behind for everyone. That's what I'm hearing. With that, I'll pass to Eva, please.
Much the same as what Jeff and Erica have said. I mean, when it comes to leaving legacy, I like to think of it like a hotel room. We have this space that we occupy, And when it comes to checking out, it's how do you want to be to be known? Do you want to be known as that messy person who left it as a horrible state? Or do you want to be known as someone who kind of was respectful about that space that you borrowed, and made it easier for the next person who comes along? So it's also what I do for, not just me, my family, my friends, but also the trans community as well. What can I leave behind? And what, I'd like to make sure that I leave it in a better condition than it was when I first arrived.
Yeah, so improving, however, simplifying. Yeah, absolutely. Big lessons. So now we're going to move on and dive in a little deeper with what each of you have brought. And we're going to consider your identities. So your queer perspective, your personalities, your lived experience, and how that lived experience with your professional positions, your place in the world, how has that shaped the legacy you hope to leave, or that you are actually leaving? Erica.
For me, there's been key moments of change within my life. I see it. The key first step was, as a 19-year-old, I married a man, a heterosexual marriage, and I was brought up as a Catholic girl who had this image of an expectation of get married and have children, and I thought that was, and I never questioned that. I saw that as that's what would happen, and within, I was young, 19. I now think back to seeing my children have grown up and seeing them past 19 and realizing how young they were and how much lived experience they hadn't experienced yet. It was a massive impact that when 10 years later, as a 29-year-old, I separated from my husband and subsequently divorced, and then tried to work out who I was. And I used this term a lot when I was talking to people at the time. I used to use the term, I have doubts about my sexuality, and I did, because I never knew for sure if I was gay, but I thought there was a possibility I might be. But during that, being 29, 30 years old, there was a massive step change in my life and who I was and who I became. And I didn't become the person I am today, but I started that journey, and quite a significant journey at that point. It was the scariest thing I ever did, but it really shaped my personality and my future from then on, obviously. But as someone who people thought was happily married to a guy, to have to change people's perceptions of me at that point was challenging, and I think it was looking back very brave for the type of person I was. I was a shy, introverted person, and it took some brave steps to even speak to solicitors, to go through a challenging divorce, as most of them are, to understand the impacts on my children at the time, who were quite young. I think they were sort of 5-7 years old, to be told by family members and friends, and to be warned that they may be bullied. And there was so many voices and opinions, and there wasn't true acceptance. But what I did know is that I needed to change my life. And I guess the legacy from that, I realised we have got to be brief, so I don't know where I'm going time-wise, but is I came away from that with a value that I've kept ever more, which is making the most of the life I have. We have one life, as I see it, and I don't want to waste opportunities that are given to me in that life, but I also want to make sure I'm doing my best to try and influence my own happiness and my own authenticity, which that's what I was striving for. I didn't quite get it, and maybe further in the discussion I'll come back to that. Didn't quite get it then, but I certainly made that route. I came out to friends and family, and and to work colleagues. The first place I came out was to work colleagues, but to a chosen few. But that was just the start of my journey. But it was the start of probably starting to leave a legacy in the interactions and the more authentic interactions I was having with people I work with my family, with my friends, and with my children. And thankfully, after all the warnings that, oh, they'd get bullied, you know, you shouldn't be doing this, you're selfish, they never did. They never did. They both went to, you know, Catholic schools, and there was thankfully no bullying. I really feared there would be, but there was nothing in the end. But that had a massive impact on you know, my beginning, I guess, to feel that legacy that I was starting to set up.
Thank you. I mean, I have about 7 questions from that reply, so I'm actually going to put to our audience. Please write any questions that you have for our speakers down. There will be about 10 minutes, hopefully at the end, for some Q&A. So get your juicy questions ready and perhaps points that you want to bring up. I'm going to go the other way this time. I'm going to go to Eva, and I'm going to ask the same question of you. So how has your identity, your lived experience, shaped the legacy you hope to leave and that you're actually leaving now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I came out quite late on in life. I've only been out for coming up to 5 years now. I always knew I was trans from the age of about 4 or 5, and that's typically when children are self-aware and start to think about themselves and how they fit into the world. And I knew there was something, I wouldn't say I knew I was trans, there was something not quite right, something didn't feel right. But unfortunately, I came from a very strict, traditional East Asian family, and it was always just pushed to the bottom. I wasn't allowed to be who I was. So I spent most of my life suffering mental health issues. It kind of held me back because I just couldn't live fully. And you know, I got to being 37 when I was on tour. Like, I was on tour with a band, like with a band that I love from Canada, and I think, you know, this is an amazing moment. I should be happy, but I wasn't, because I was sat on stage behind a drum kit every night, playing to people who thought they knew me, presenting and playing a certain role. They were seeing me and they would come and talk to me afterwards, and I felt like I wasn't being authentic. I felt a complete fraud. That didn't sit well with me. And after tour, that's when I really started to think, who am I? You know, why can't I just be happy? Why do I have meltdown after meltdown? Why am I self-sabotaging my life? And that's when I decided to take time out and really think about who I was. And subsequently, I admitted to myself that I'm transgender, I'm a trans woman. And I wasn't always proud to be, you know, to begin with. I still considered myself a bit of a freak. But I knew that I had to come out. Coming out is what saved me and allowed me to live for the first time ever. And as I said, that was just under 5 years ago. And ever since then, I've thought, you know what? I've been through a whole lifetime of struggle because I knew that people wouldn't accept me. I couldn't accept myself. So how can I expect other people to? So I've then decided, you know what? If I can do anything in this world, it's to raise awareness, share who I am, be proud of who I am, and to start paving the way so other people don't have to live until they're nearly 40 to then come out, especially when it comes to things like trans healthcare, which is diabolical in the UK at the moment, and especially in England. And I don't want people to have to wait for years just to get a first appointment on the NHS. So it's helped to shape my legacy and what I do now. Just remembering why I'm doing it and who I'm doing it for.
Thank you. And I've got one question, one point for what you said. There was a sentence in there and you said you considered yourself a freak. I'll be devil's advocate and just ask you to unpack that for us in terms of what did you mean and how did that affect your lived experience and legacy?
Yeah, I mean, I look at myself now and I don't consider myself a freak at all. throughout my journey, I've learned so much more about myself. And, you know, coming out, the whole idea of coming out, people expect you to have all the answers before you come out. And that, you know, you come out and you say, this is who I am. You sit back and let the world accept you. But that's just the starting point. For me, back then, I was still living in very much of a binary sort of world where I thought, okay, well, I was assigned male at birth, but I identify as female. So therefore, I must go from one box straight into the other box. And as I've journeyed and as I've progressed, I've kind of opened my eyes up to the world, to what gender identity is, how I actually fit into the world. And I've realized that the world isn't binary. And why I considered myself a freak in the past was because I saw myself as the opposite of what I should be. My whole existence went against these unwritten rules that we're taught when we're children: blue for boys, pink for girls, you know, boys don't cry, boys play with certain toys. I went against that. And because I didn't have those answers back then, I spent my entire life carrying that with me, thinking, you're just an anomaly, you don't fit in, you're just a freak, and unfortunately. And so, yeah, as I've journeyed, I've really kind of worked on myself to unpack that, to understand why I thought those things. And most importantly, why other people would also think those things, whether allies, whether parents of trans people, or trans people themselves.
Thank you. Jeff, your identity and your lived experience, how has it shaped what you're creating as your legacy?
Very strongly would be the short answer, but I will elaborate. I mean, I've been working in a professional capacity, white collar jobs for about 35 years now. And so, you know, we're talking about the mid 80s or mid to late 80s when I was first setting out in London. And, you know, I'm at the time I was qualified, you know, my first professional job was as a chartered accountant. So I did my qualifications. And when I set out, the first organization I joined was a medium-sized accounting practice based right in the middle of London, Piccadilly, and did my chartered accounting qualification with them. And I was one of 15 people who started on the same day, you know, but to be trainees really. And the day that we started, I looked around the room. It wasn't a big room. 15 of us, 15 white cis men, all in suits, looking extremely generic. Not a woman among them. Nobody of any protected characteristic, obviously, certainly no minority ethnicities or anything like that. And this was the world that we were living in. It was, you know, a very, very monochrome, very binary existence. And this was what was expected of you. You know, and this, even then, I remember I was 20 at the time, and this jarred me. I was like, well, how can life within these walls be so different to what it is outside the walls? It's crazy. So, you know, I didn't do anything about it, of course, because I was 20 and I was focused upon, you know, working all the hours God sends to become, you know, a qualified chartered accountant, which is all the hours God sends. If anyone's ever done that, I share your pain. A few years later, once I qualified, I moved to Hong Kong, actually, to join one of the big four accounting practices and get my big firm experience. And had all these visions about Hong Kong, which I preface this by saying I absolutely love Hong Kong. I spent 14 years there, and my husband is from Hong Kong. But I expected to go there and find it to be, you know, a very, very cutting edge place, and stepped into what was almost a Dickensian attitude there of the big firm. Again, the levels of prejudice within, actually to a certain extent society, but certainly within the firm were appalling. I mean, the sexism, casual sexism and overt sexism, the misogyny, the racism, which was in all directions, and certainly that, you know, anything, you know, homophobia was rampant, and as in you were just the butt of jokes. So everybody would keep their head down. Nobody was ever going to put their head above the parapet in those circumstances. It was the opposite of an inclusive environment, and I just didn't fit. You know, even though I wasn't out at work at that time, I just did not feel comfortable with that level of bigotry that was surrounding me, actually. And I thought, well, this isn't for me. So I moved out of that and I moved into banking. And banking itself was better, but, you know, over the course of, you know, 30 years or so in banking, I've been in an awful lot of pretty, you know, sometimes pretty toxic environments. Walk around a lot of trading floors, you're going to hear some stuff that will make your toes curl, and it's not always very pretty. So particularly in the early days back in the 90s, this was, you know, something which was very, very obviously in need of a bit of work. And that was really, all of this has sort of slowly occurred to me that, you know, I really needed to do something about this. It took me half my life and then subsequently half my career to actually, you know, come out. First, mainly to myself. I was 28 when I came out, and that was, you know, the first person I came out to was myself, because, to borrow Erica's phrase before that, I had doubts about my sexual orientation, but I was convinced that I fell on the heterosexual side, which I really fairly obviously don't. But it took me until the age of 28 to really deal with that, and it took me over another 10 years to deal with that in a work environment, because at that point, until that point, I was really all about protecting myself, because in the environments that I worked in, they were quite often so toxic that this was the only defense mechanism I could create, which is very common. You just keep your head down and, you know, pretend to be someone that you're not, and spend all your time passing and you know, covering for really who you are, and not bringing your whole self to work by any stretch of the imagination. But as I got older and realizing, you know, if I were going to really leave a legacy, it should be this. I should actually stand up and be counted and get over myself. It's not all about me. I need to be the person who makes the change for the people who are coming afterwards. They should not be stepping into the same environment that I was 30 years ago, 35 years ago. It just wasn't healthy, and it shouldn't be the case now. So in the last 10, 12 years or so, you know, I co-founded the LGBTQ network at my previous employer, BNP Paribas, and I've chaired or co-chaired the network here at Macquarie for nearly all of my 9-year tenure, and have spent my entire time becoming much better known for that than anything I actually do in my day job, because, you know, I'm the person who's always banging the drum for, you know, in particularly inclusion, not just diversity, but also inclusion and equity. And I'm feeling that is what I'm really seeing as my mission and my legacy. I want to leave this place, and indeed the financial services industry, better than it was when I arrived. And it needs to be better than it was when I arrived 35 years ago. It was not a pretty place to be if you were, you know, with any minority and any protected characteristic, and certainly not invisible characteristics like being LGBTQ+. That was something that you really just wanted to keep invisible, and we shouldn't be doing that. That's not healthy. And I don't want anybody to feel that they have to keep themselves in any way hidden. They should be their authentic selves in the work environment and in their lives. And if I can leave that as my legacy, then I'll be a happy man.
Thank you. So for all of you, you didn't have much to say on that question at all, did you? We'll move on. I mean, I could really unpack a lot of what each one of you has said, but we'll move on with what I'm taking away from what I've just heard. It's a very similar story to what a lot of queer people experience. We have this identity that we want to expand and show, and fear is also a driver. And what I'm hearing as a commonality here is each one of you has taken that fear as a driver for positive change, which is fascinating and very admirable for all of us. So thank you. So we're now going to move on to a question that deals with the question of age. And, you know, age, we're all terrified, right, of getting older when we're younger. And as we get older, we're like, this isn't so bad. I, as a gay male, find much more pressure, personally, getting older in the community. There's a lot of fear of being forgotten. Now, with that said, I'm going to ask each one of you the question. As we grow older and you consider your queer leadership, and some of it was unpacked in what you had shared with us, but as we grow older, how is this impacting your development as a queer leader? And what have you had to let go? What are the limiting beliefs, the unrealistic expectations, the old scripts that you're just like, well, you know what, this is not serving? So, Erica.
As I touched on earlier, you know, it wasn't until I was 30 I came out. I'm 50 this year, so yeah, 20 years ago. However, it was only probably 5 years ago that I can truly say that I finally accepted myself in many ways. That was, I think we've heard Jeff and Eva say in from what's been said already, that time it's taken, and to really work out who we are. And even though I came out at 30, it was another 15 years. And a lot of that actually was down to the heavy involvement in our employee network. I was one of the founders of our employee network, our LGBTQ plus employee network at the Body Shop. And suddenly we had visibility. Suddenly there was more people from our community, because we didn't know, we saw ourselves as a diverse and inclusive company, but there was no visibility. And one of the easiest tools that helped was a rainbow colored lanyard, of all things. Suddenly people were wearing them. Suddenly people were talking more openly. You realized there was, hundreds of allies there supporting us. And what I realized until that point was I had been wasting so much energy on the editing, the choosing who to say what to, who to refer to, who to say, my wife, or just say my partner, who to potentially correct. Would it be career damaging? Would I progress in my career? Would people accept me? Would people include me? What were people saying behind my back? All of this was going around and around my head, and so much energy. And I said, these last 5 years, I know that I've had this self-belief, which then has had an impact on my confidence in the workplace as a leader. I feel better equipped to support other people with different varied life experiences, but I really don't want people to be going through, anyone to be going through and wasting energy in the same way. And if I'd had someone within our business as I was younger who was openly gay and I could relate to, and would that have been different for me? Massively. So I try and balance the being honest with everyone and telling everybody my life story, but also just trying to be there to support people, to show that it's okay to be, your true self, and don't waste your energy. However, I've got an additional challenge. Just as I'm finding my true self and accepting myself, I'm now perimenopausal. So it's having I'm fighting the impact that's having on me with my anxiety and my confidence levels again, because that's reminding me of old, sometimes how I felt. So I'm doing things to try and manage that, but also being aware of another challenge. But trying to address that at the same time. But my key thing is, I don't want people to, I don't want others to have to, go through some of what I went through. If we can, by doing these talks, by sharing our experience, if we can impact that, and all the other things that we're involved in, then, it's back to that. It's a lovely legacy to leave behind. But it's also sharing how far I've managed to come, because I never saw myself here where I am now, doing these things, talking on live panels, being on radio shows, talking openly and being vulnerable. I never saw that, but I guess anything's possible. And actually, I think coming out and going through the lived experience I have done has made me has made me a more rounded and more empathetic leader as a result. And that's the thing I'm probably most proud of within my career so far.
Thank you, and we thank you for your vulnerability and your continued service. I mean, there's so much with the visibility that you've created that people are allowed to be themselves. So thank you. Jeff, I'm going to bring you in on this at this point. With your age, you had mentioned some of it with your experience in Hong Kong and the different cultures and whatnot. Yeah, how has growing older brought you to now, and your development as a queer leader, and what stories, what biases did you have to let go or fight through? You're on mute.
That has to happen at least once on every one of these, right? I mean, with age comes experience. With experience comes a degree of wisdom and awareness, and really, the benefit of that is that you can look at things dispassionately and say, well, as I mentioned earlier, stop looking at yourself all the time and look at the shadow you cast. And really the awareness that you want people, really, as Erica was just saying, not to kind of have to go through the same sort of thing. I was just recording a podcast a few days ago, and one of the things that kept coming up was around authenticity, was just really this belief that virtually everybody in the community will go through at some point in their life, that they are literally the only person in the world who's going through this. No one has ever been through this before. And you just think, you're not alone. You're not even close to being alone. You just need to find that space where you can actually be yourself. And it's incumbent upon those of us who've been through that process to use our age, to use our experience, to try to lay those foundations for those people, so that they don't have to do that again. So it's a similar point that I was making previously, is if you've been through tough times, or you've been through times which you've had to spend your energies in ways you would prefer not to have done, by editing, covering, etc. You learn what that means, and the detriment that has on your own personal well-being, but also just the value that you could be adding if you weren't doing all of that. And as somebody who is fairly senior in finance or in industry or whatever, I mean, if you look at your team and they're spending their time doing the wrong things, why would you want to encourage that? I mean, it makes no sense at all from a business perspective, much less a moral perspective. So it's really a question of just learning from practical experience what you've been through, and trying to extrapolate it onto the value, for value for other people. And what that means in terms of letting go, letting go in this is a good thing. Basically, as you get older, you kind of don't really care that much, right? I'm relatively senior. I'm not worried about being promoted anymore or that sort of stuff. So you basically can take a few more risks and have those conversations where you actually say, well, it's time we brought this out into the open, and you can initiate that discussion and that debate. You don't need to necessarily say, well, okay, let's leave that at home. Let's bring that into the workplace. So, for example, I mean, under the auspices of being, the leader of the Macquarie Pride Network, I've introduced conversations and events and campaigns around an awful lot of really thorny kind of subjects, which we want people to get their teeth into. It's no longer just like, can we all just be okay with each other? Let's talk about the intersectional aspects and the compounding barriers that having multiple identities can have. Let's talk about what it happens to be if you are LGBTQ plus and of faith, for example, or a minority ethnicity, or disabled, or old, or whatever it is. Let's have those conversations. The advantage of being old enough not to worry about, somebody saying you really shouldn't be having those conversations, is you just tend to have them. And that means somebody else hopefully will learn from that. So I've let go of my reticence to do that, which was what held me back earlier in my career, when I was worried about being, that person who didn't get promoted, to being the person who doesn't mind about that anymore and wants to help other people in their future careers so they don't have to have that worry.
Thank you. So very much being steadfast in who you are, and not backing down from that, and bringing it everywhere you go so that it ripples out. Thank you. Eva.
I've had to let go quite a bit just to move on, I guess. When I first came out, like I mentioned earlier, I was living in a binary world, and I thought, okay, if I'm a trans woman, this is how I need to look, this is how I need to dress, this is how I need to present. I used to spend ages on like how I appeared and how I fitted in with the world. And to a certain extent, this idea of passing as a woman meant a lot to me back then, to the point where I was almost obsessed with it, because yes, it allows an element of safety for trans people, because it allows us to move from A to B without being subjected to abuse or even violence or anything like that. But that's when I realized, why am I living to that standard? Who says a woman or a man has to look or dress in a certain way? So I started to kind of take a step back and think, the idea of passing for a trans woman, for example, is cisgender oppression. If you say you're a woman, well, this is what you've got to look like. But then you've got cisgender women who are rebelling against body standards and shapes and image. So I pushed back against that and realized that how I express myself and how I want to appear is down to me. And as Jeff has just touched on, it's this element of growing older, being wiser. In my case, it's a bit questionable, but also kind of thinking, I don't care, you know, I've lived a lot. In my case, I've lived a lot in the wrong life. That's probably the best way to say it. And now I want to live correctly, the way I want to live my life. And I'm no longer hung up about the idea of passing all the smaller things. I can see how bad and how toxic that was for me and how it consumed me. And I'd like to say to my community now, you can skip straight to the finish line. You know, you don't have to go through that. You can if you want to, but here's another option. And it's presenting options to the next generation based on our experience to say, this is how it was for me. You don't have to go through this as well. You know, it can stop here and we can create that change and move forward together. And with it being LGBTQ plus History Month, when I first came out and you know, was welcomed by this larger, more accepting family, which is the LGBTQ plus family, I would look back and think, you know, the people like Marsha P. Johnson, absolutely amazing icons. And I look back at what they did and I think, you know what, I'd love to be able to leave a little something where I can create enough change. And I guess it's also letting go has made me realize I don't need to do something absolutely massive and go out with a bang. Just doing enough and doing what I can around me to kind of pass that torch on to the next generation is enough. And especially with trans people right now going through what is essentially Section 28. Now, we all know what happened with Section 28 and, you know, subsequent repeal. Why are we not skipping to the ending? Why are we not using those lessons and applying them right now? And we can do, as long as we go about it the right way. So that's really kind of pushed and shaped what I do now and how I go about it.
Yeah, and thank you for your courage, because what I'm hearing is there's a lot of social structure that's we've created, that humanity has created. Now, who says that's right? It's our job to dismantle it and construct it so that it works for everyone, not for someone. So yeah, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So in the respect of time and to give some people Q&A, what I'm going to do, we now have 3 specific questions, one for each of you. And I'm going to ask you to concentrate your answers and try and give us, the way I say it is say it in a sentence. So try and give us 1 or 2 bullet points to the questions that I give you. Nice and simple so that people can have their takeaways. They're big questions, so it's a very challenging thing I'm about to ask you to do. So, Erica, you've had a significant impact with a very large organization, and you've talked about that. If you were to give others here today some advice and confidence to make a difference, what are 1 or 2 things that you would say, this is what you have to take away to do that?
For me, it's being open and showing your vulnerability as much as you're willing to. Trust others, because I think most of the time you can trust people. Draw strength and confidence from friends, colleagues, family, but draw, and one way of doing that, which helped me and it helped many others in our organisation massively, was by setting up an employee network for our LGBTQ plus community. That was a massive step change for me, and I know many others in our business. So that brings all of that together. We drew strength from each other, and we were vulnerable, and we were open with each other. And as a result, we've been able to support a lot more people across the business, across our global business.
So being vulnerable and
open.
Being vulnerable and open, and just being yourself, trusting that you're enough. Fantastic. Jeff, your specific question. You've talked about, the high level of work and corporate world that you've worked in investment banking. And now I'm going to ask you, what change did you set out to make through your involvement in the various Pride networks and campaigns that you've led? You've talked about how you've instigated them and you've brought them and you wanted to make a change. But I'm asking you, what change did you set out to make? And what change are you seeing?
Yeah, I think there are two. One is making people realize that this is an important, it's an imperative in two ways, I should say. It's an imperative both morally and it's an imperative for business, because money really does talk. And if you are particularly working in financial services, if you can appeal to people's sense of the bottom line, that often does get their attention more than the more sort of kumbaya approach of saying, look, this really is the right thing to do. They kind of know it's the right thing to do, but it's rather like your year-end appraisal. You've done all this good soft stuff, but by the way, you didn't make enough money, so you're not getting as big a bonus as you'd like. That sort of thing often happens in the industry. So you want to create those two things. So those were the two parallels I wanted to try to bring to people's conscious awareness. And it's really just about saying, okay, what do I need to imbue people with? What knowledge do I need to imbue people with about the value of this? So it's demonstrating to senior leaders and people within their shadow the value of being authentic at work and why inclusion matters, about creating a psychologically safe space for everybody to be themselves so that they can contribute. They're not covering. And why does that matter? Because we're talking about organizational learning here. If the environment is one in which no one challenges anything, all you'll do is carry on doing business as usual, and fine, you'll probably progress on a fairly even keel, but you won't be making any sea changes or any great progress. And if you want to do that, you need to mix it up a bit. So it's been proven endless times that a well-managed, as in an inclusive, diverse group will outperform a homogeneous group. Really fairly markedly. You wouldn't pick 100 Welshmen to make a curry if you could have mixed lots of different people from around the world to have a go at making that curry. They might actually bring some more flavors to it and it make a bit more success. That's a crude example, but you know what I mean. That sort of awareness that there's more than just received wisdom here. If you do things slightly differently, there is business value to be added. That took a while, because that usually what people look at when you come at them with this argument about inclusion, they usually see you as coming at through an HR perspective and saying it's the right thing to do. Let's not get sued. There's a defensive mentality. You've got to get over that hump, and that's about a slow process of education and awareness of the upside of this rather than preventing the downside. And that's really been the journey's end point, if you like. It will never be reached, but the constant goal of that is to say, well, make sure that the people who really have influence within the organization get this. They understand that inclusion and psychological safety, authentic leadership, and adding value rather than focusing on preventing downside is actually both a moral and a business compulsion. And if you do that, then actually everybody's going to be benefiting from the whole process.
Thank you. Yes, and very much to what Erica said, it's to do that, to have the courage to do that, we have to be vulnerable. We have to set out for not only what's right in human resources, but what's really right in here. Connect. That's what I'm hearing, that you've really connected here to make a difference out there, and it just makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you. And Eva, so as an activist, and you've touched on this a little bit, the fight for change in NHS for transgender service seems absolutely never ending. So what helps you sustain your drive and resilience, not only there, but in the challenges that you've talked in general? What are 2 or 3 bullet points you could give the audience of drive and resilience? This is how to show up in the world. and challenge anything?
It is never ending. I'll give it that. Most importantly, we've got to remember that whilst we create space for others, we have to make sure we create space for ourselves. We have to know our own limits and understand that when we reach that limit, let's take some time out, completely, just put it down. The fight will go on another day. But if you need to take that time to recharge, that's the most important thing, because otherwise you're useless. You won't be able to do anything effectively. So that's perhaps the most important thing I would always share. Also making sure you have a support network that's there, because someone, people that understand what you're about, what you're up to, someone who can listen when you need them to, or even just people who are so removed from what you do that you can just go away and just hang out with them. And in my case, I have a little dog, little chihuahua, who follows me around the house, loves me to bits. And for me, that's my way of just when I finish working and I step outside of the office at home, I can just go and play with Boomer. And, it's just that wind down time, and it allows me time to kind of gain a better perspective and to recharge. And most importantly, also, be your own kind of beautiful, because there is no one way to exist in this world. There's no right or wrong answer. And reminding myself of that helps me to drive forward as well, to want to share that message with other people.
Thank you, Eva. Just brilliant answers from all three of you. We could actually have an entire series on this. I think it's really amazing. Jeff, I know you need to leave early, so I'm going to, if possible, can I squeeze in one quick question with you from the chat?
I'll make it 30 seconds. That'll be fine.
Okay, there's a question here I think that might really apply to you. And the question in the chat is, I'm fascinated by intergenerational work. I'm kind of hooked on the idea of breaking down age as a division in the same way we're breaking down gender. All ages have different perspectives and experiences which can be shared. So this person would love to hear your take on this. Is this a good, realistic ambition to have? Have you had experience with breaking down age barriers? And do you feel like the queer community is pretty good at this? Or they feel like the queer community is pretty good at this, but they'd like to hear your perspective in 30 seconds.
Yeah, it's absolutely the right thing to be thinking about. As somebody who is a middle-aged man now, I don't like to think of myself as the older community, but I probably am. But within the work that I've been doing the last few years, I've worked with, for example, Opening Doors London, which is a charity which focuses on the older LGBT community. But I also, one of my driving ambitions when I really first grasped the nettle on this and started running the network was a desire to get more young people involved, because so many of the people who were involved were exhibiting some of the things that I was saying earlier, like, we're too old to really care anymore. So, we'll put our heads above the parapet. But the youngsters were not, because they were worried about their career. So right across the spectrum, you basically do need to engage everybody, both, upstream and downstream, if you like, in terms of age. Everybody should be working together, and there's absolutely no reason that shouldn't happen. Basically the older people should be using the experience to help the younger generations, but the younger generations should also be using the value of their learnings to help the people who've gone before them. And that's what we've been doing as much as we can. So it's an absolutely the right thing to do. I think we're better at it than we think, but for sure there's always room for improvement. So everybody who wants to get involved in trying to help intergenerational or getting over any other barriers around any other form of intersectional barrier is something I very much encourage people to do.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I know you have to run, so I'll let you go, because I know you have got probably a big, very important meeting. So please leave.
I'm very apologetic about it, but thank you so much for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you for being here and just being open and sharing your wisdom with everyone today. We've been honored. Thank you. I'll now move on to the Q&A section, and I'm not sure if our speakers have had chance to look at the Q&A section. I know that we're going to be really limited with time here, and I don't know if Michael can send me a message, if we can run over, or do we have to absolutely end at 5? Because I know we've got 4 questions, and there's no way we can. Okay, I've got the go ahead that we can run over if the speakers don't mind. So I'm gonna what I would like to do is I'm going to read the question, because I haven't had time to read because I was really listening. And then if one of you would like to jump in and say, hey, I'll take that. So this question is from Ant, and Ant, as a 47-year-old out-of-work person at a relatively new company of 250 people, which does not yet have a fully developed embedded D&I framework, I do feel a certain responsibility to use my age and experience to help make workplace better for younger LGBTQ people, especially as Stonewall stats suggest that around 30% of LGBTQ people, QI people, are not out of the workplace. We do not yet have an LGBTQ group, ERG. Sorry, my glasses aren't that great, so that's why I'm stumbling. But we do have a general employee-led D&I working group. So the question: did the panel think it is important to create a specific LGBTQI and ERG, and what are the first key steps to take in creating that network?
I'm happy to answer.
I was actually going to shove it over to you, Erica, because you've done this.
Yeah, we did this, as I say, it was about 5 years ago. I would say yes. The simple answer is yes. It is worth having a focused LGBTQ plus employee group. We did that by engaging with Stonewall initially and joining their program and getting advice. We started with nothing. None of our initial committee knew anything about employee networks. None of us had been involved in any previously. So we really learned the hard way. We made mistakes. But I think the key thing was that we brought members of the LGBTQ plus community together from the Body Shop with our allies, and that was the starting point. The honesty, the openness, the challenges. I don't think we got it right all the time, but as I say, just coming together and finding that strength and confidence in each other helped us then, and sharing different lived experiences. It was the starting point. So it was a massive step to going on to create events, create education, to influence the business, and to support fundamentally, which was our aim, to support our network across the business. Initially, we stayed UK focused, and then we only took it global during COVID, when we had the brilliance of Microsoft Teams and so on, and all these tools, and we went global. We didn't want to run before we could walk. We wanted to take it steadily and get things right. We didn't want to get it wrong. We were cautious, but we were quite systematic in our approach, and as a result, have a thriving network now. So I would say definitely yes. So
what I'm hearing, the key takeaways for this, and I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, is absolutely yes. Definitely start this network. Have a vision, and don't worry about getting it right all the time. We can improve as we go along. Thank you. Eva, I think the next question is perfect for you, Eva. How do you decide how broad your legacy will be? Climate change, equity, supporting LGBTQ community, etc. How do you decide local or global? How local or how global your legacy will be?
The most important thing is use your strengths and play to those strengths, because we're all good at different things. We all have different experiences and different things, and it's making the most of them. And if you happen to work within your community at a grassroots level, then great. You have a great connection with that, so nurture that connection straight away. Use that as your starting point. If you have quite a big reach on, say, social media, then there's no harm in trying to go for more of an international approach. For me particularly, I have experience in litigation as well as graphics and design. Typical things you would all put together, obviously. So it's kind of using a bit of everything to kind of create change where I can. And yeah, I do things on more of a national level, but it's kind of knowing what you can do, what you can chip away at. And if I know that I can't do something, or something's beyond my reach, then I know not to overexert myself or waste my energy on that, because I know there will be other great people out there who can fight that battle, and for me to focus on what I can actually influence.
I think that's a brilliant answer. So use your strengths and use your network's strengths to create and then build your legacy from there, and not be worried so much about global, but start here and then it will take care of itself. Brilliant. So we have two more questions and I think they're perfect. So I'm actually going to pass them to each one of you. So Erica, this question I'd like to ask you, at the risk of generalizing, do you believe millennials and Gen Z are far less fearful to have these kind of conversations in the workspace that we've talked about today? And if it impacts their career paths, should they simply leave and seek an organization more aligned with their core values? It's a difficult tension to balance, career development and the desire to show up fully for oneself. So I think the question is, do these younger millennial Gen Z people sort of make a stand or leave and find something already set up?
I think you can only do what you feel comfortable doing. So it, depending on your own experience, how you're feeling, how confident you're feeling, then, and it will heavily depend on the individual and their own experience. But I think it will depend on the organisation if you think there's hope. But I think it comes down to, if you feel comfortable, what do you feel comfortable to do? And if you feel comfortable to do something, then for me, that's probably the best step to take. If you don't feel comfortable to challenge the organisation you're in, then maybe it's an opportunity to look elsewhere. But if you do, then try it. Put trust in your own self-belief, and maybe the assumptions you've made of others or the organisation may not be right, but it will be very much dependent on what you feel comfortable to do yourself, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's key to what you said earlier, the vulnerability and that trust. It's a feeling. Everyone has a different point that they feel comfortable with, but safety, it has to feel natural. Otherwise, it's not going to come out right anyway. So it has to really feel natural to someone and comfortable. Although I did hear it might feel a little bit scary at the beginning, but never completely uncomfortable or unnatural. So yes, thank you. Last question actually was the first question asked, and I believe this person has left, but it's being recorded, so hopefully they'll be able to view the answer. Eva, the question is, this person is fascinated. Oh, sorry, this person is, I believe still here. As lesbian parents of a lovely daughter living in London, we feel safe until we're in a room where there's someone who finds it weird that our daughter has a mummy and a mama. I'm not asking from a parenting perspective, but how do you deal with this feeling? By law, we are more protected now, but that sense of being an outsider is still there. I'm accepting that I'm an outsider, but I'd like to hear about your thoughts and your perspective around strategies in various different environments. It's a perfect question for you, Eva, because you were talking about this.
This is something I'm still working on. I mean, as a trans woman, I can't be who I am without being visible. It's not something I can hide. For example, if I was to say, oh, I'm gay, I could go about my life and not many people would know. But to choose to be myself and to choose to be visible is taking a risk. But put it this way, by choosing to be visible, you're choosing the most basic form of activism. You're allowing your existence to be on show. And if that challenges people, for example, you're in a waiting room, if that challenges people, then great. You've come away having challenged and pushed them a little bit. And when I first came out, I mean, even now, I still get so many looks and things like that when I'm out in public. I don't really care anymore. And that's because I look at it from a different point of view. Back then, I'd be like, oh, they're staring at me, they're judging me. It could be violence, could be this. Now I just think, you know what, if it happens, it happens. Hopefully not. But if it does, it's out of my control. And that's the most important thing. It's beyond my control what other people think. I can only focus on what I think about myself, my own situation. Now, if that person goes away and says, I saw a trans woman, oh my word, you should see the state of them, blah, blah, blah. Again, I don't care, because I've infected their conversation. They're talking about trans people. I'm not there to defend myself. They may be slagging me off, but it doesn't matter. That person and that group at that moment are talking about trans people. So my visibility has gone into their world. And slowly and surely, by doing that, by being visible, we can affect changes on a very, very subtle level. The next time that person sees another trans person, they'll probably not even bat an eyelid. And slowly but surely, we, as trans people, we become normalized. So, the same applies to any minority group. It's being visible and showing that you belong in that space as well. And it's just that slight shift in just how you look at the situation can make all that difference.
Thank you so much. And Michael's come in to cut us short, but I just wanted to thank all of the audience who took the time to be here. I know Michael's going to do this, and I wanted to leave you with a quick couple of just closing thoughts from our speakers, and thank our speakers for such immense wisdom. What I'm taking away is be vulnerable, be courageous in being nothing but yourself, and make change, because that will be the legacy, not only for you, but for everybody. And that we are all writing a story, and age and what we do is but a story. So have fun creating that story. Thank you, everyone. Michael.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And just to echo the gratitude, I really appreciate you all being here, your time, your energy. I could listen to you all evening. I've gained so much from it, as always. Ellie's dropped some links in the chat. The next Queer Perspectives is taking place on the 24th of March. We'll be looking at queer leaders of faith. And we've got our next Queer Leadership 101 webinar on the 8th of March, looking at how to shift the mindset of others to support the development and growth of LGBTQ+ employees. So on that note, I will leave you all to have a lovely evening or rest of day, depending on where you are. And I hope to see you soon. Thank you all. Bye-bye.